This video guide covers all the birds you're likely to see on a regular basis in Britain. In fact, it covers over 270 species, so as well as all the common birds, we've also included those which are either very localised or which only occur here as scarce migrants. The birds are grouped by family rather than by habitat, size, colour or whatever. So all the geese are together, the finches are together and so on. The family is arranged in a scientifically established taxonomic order, which begins with the divers and ends with the buntings. We've tried to avoid using technical terms, but they're sometimes necessary if you want to give an accurate description of a bird. Bird topography charts can be found in all modern field guides. Here's one from my recent book on the birds of Britain and Ireland. If these details seem rather daunting, then don't worry, you can birdwatch perfectly happily without learning them. But even learning a few basic ones can be a very useful asset. Some, like the bill and the crown, don't really need explaining, but it's worth remembering that the flight feathers divide naturally into the primaries, which are the large feathers on the outer wing, and the secondaries on the inner half of the wing. Head markings can also be important, particularly on small birds such as warblers. The supercilium is a variable, usually pale line which runs back from the base of the bill and passes above the eye. In contrast, the eye stripe is a line which runs back from the base of the bill and passes through the eye. Anyway, that's enough on technicalities. The aim of this video is to show you as much moving footage as possible. So, let's move on to the species accounts. Red-throated divers are scarce breeding birds in northwest Scotland, but can be seen almost anywhere around the coast in winter. The red throat of birds in breeding plumage is of course diagnostic. Although the red throat is a key feature, in some lights, as here, it can simply look rather dark. The bill is relatively slender and is tilted slightly upwards, a feature that's exaggerated by their habit of holding the bill just above the horizontal. All divers look hunchbacked in flight. The small size and thin neck of red-throated diver is usually apparent, and they always seem to move the neck around. Black-throated divers are rare breeding birds in northern Britain. They're commoner in winter, but are noticeably scarcer than red-throated divers. Breeding birds are extremely handsome. The black throat is bordered with striping, and the rest of the head and neck is grey. The checkered white spotting on the upper part separates them from red-throated divers, which have plainer upper parts. They're slightly larger than red-throated divers, with a heavier and more dagger-like bill, which lacks an up-tilt. They have darker upper parts than the other divers. Watch out for a noticeable white patch at the rear of the body. This is a characteristic feature of non-breeding black-throated divers. Great northern divers don't breed in Britain and are rather scarce winter visitors, commonest in the north and west. Birds in full breeding plumage aren't often seen in Britain, but the combination of black bill, black head and neck with a striped part collar and white spotted upper parts makes them quite unmistakable. This is the largest of the divers, being close in size to a cormorant, but like all divers they have a short tail and a pointed bill. The bill turns pale in winter, though at close range you can see a dark upper edge. The bill is heavier than on the other divers, and note the whitish eye ring and the fact that they show a faint impression of the half collar of breeding plumage. Great-crested grebes are fairly common breeding birds on freshwater lakes and reservoirs. Breeding birds have white underparts, rufous flanks and brown upperparts, but their main feature is the orange and blackish head plumes. This is the largest of the grebes, so they could be confused with a diver, but they're smaller, with a pinkish bill, a dark line between the eye and the bill, and even in non-breeding plumage they usually show a trace of the head tufts. Red-necked grebes are regular but rather scarce winter visitors, particularly to eastern and southern coasts. This is the only European grebe which doesn't nest in Britain, so the red-necked breeding plumage is a rare sight here. They are similar to a great crested grebe, but are a bit smaller, darker and stockier. In particular, the neck is thicker and the dark cap runs down below the eye and onto the cheeks. The bill is dark with a distinct yellowy base. Slavonian grebes are the next size down in the grebe world, being distinctly smaller than red-necked grebes. The small British breeding population is restricted to a few lochs in Scotland, which is a great pity because this is an absolutely gorgeous bird with a dark head enlivened by golden plumes running back from the eye. The neck is dark red but looks dark from a distance. They are more widespread in winter when the plumage is basically dark above and white below. The bill is medium length and tapers evenly to a point. The white cheeks contrast with the dark crown and they have a rather flat-headed appearance. Black-necked grebes are also rare breeding birds in Britain, often nesting close to colonies of black-headed gulls. They're a bit smaller than Slavonian grebes, and both species have golden feathering on the dark head. But on black-necked grebe, the golden feathering forms a fan on the side of the head, whereas on Slavonian grebe it forms a plume higher on the head above the eye. Non-breeding birds look duller than Slavonian grebes and have a steep forehead, dusky face and a thin, up-tilted bill. The little grebe, or dabchick, is the smallest of the grebes, a fluffy, pint-sized bird that nests on a variety of freshwater sites. In summer they have a chestnut face and neck, and there's a bright yellow spot at the base of the bill. Non-breeding birds are relatively plain with dull, buffy underparts, unlike the other grebes which have white underparts. The undertail coverts often look fluffy and conspicuously pale. They have a distinctive whinnying call. Fulmars are common breeding birds on coastal cliffs, particularly in the north of Britain. The grey and white plumage means they look distinctly gull-like, but the thick, tube-nosed bill shows they're related to the albatrosses and shearwaters. They fly with a distinctly stiff-winged action, flapping frequently in light winds, but shearing and gliding in stronger winds. They can be mistaken for a shearwater, so it's worth getting to know the tubby-bodied and bull-necked silhouette, which is characteristic of a fulmar. Manx shearwaters are the only shearwaters which breed in Britain. They are more likely to be seen flying past a coastal headland, though they're often rather distant. Seen like this, they're just black and white birds which glide on stiff wings, interspersed with bursts of flapping. The larger auks can look surprisingly similar, but they have shorter and more angled wings and flap more or less continuously. Balearic shearwaters are distinctly scarce birds in British waters. This is a bird you aren't actually likely to see unless A, you know what you're looking for, and B, you spend a lot of time staring out to sea. They're very closely related to the Manx shearwater, but are a bit bigger and shorter-tailed. The upper parts are browner, and the underparts are distinctly dusky, so they don't look as black and white. Sooty shearwaters nest in the southern hemisphere and are regular but scarce birds off British coasts in the autumn. They live up to their name, being sooty blackish birds, though at closer ranges the silvery underwing shows. They're slightly bigger and chubbier birds than Manx shearwaters, and of course the underbody is blackish, not white. Sooty shearwaters can look similar to dark Balearic shearwaters, but are bigger, darker and longer winged. Great shearwaters are very scarce visitors to British coastal waters, seen mostly in the autumn. This is a large shearwater with a dark cap, a pale collar and a pale patch at the base of the tail. At very close range, it's possible to see the dark underwing markings. Cornish shearwaters are another scarce visitor to British coastal waters. This is a large but rather featureless shearwater, being brownish above with a paler head and noticeably pale bill. The flight action can be surprisingly loose and flappy for a shearwater. An indistinct dark W is just visible on the upper wing. Young gannets and large gulls can be mistaken for them, but it's worth remembering that Cornish shearwaters are genuinely scarce birds in Britain. Storm petrels breed on isolated rocky islands and headlands off the Atlantic coast of Britain. Few birdwatchers get to see them on their breeding grounds, and they're more likely to be seen through a telescope as they fly past at sea, but this can be an awkward bird to connect with. They're small birds with a fluttery, almost bat-like flight. The rump is white, and with good views you can see a white bar on the underwing. Leach's petrels nest at a few remote sites in northwestern Britain. They're most likely to be seen in the autumn when gales can drive them inshore, and birds occasionally turn up inland, which storm petrels almost never do. They're slightly bigger than storm petrels, with longer, more pointed and more angled wings. There's a pale bar on the upper wing, but the underwing is all dark. With very good views, it is possible to see that the tail is forked, and that there's a faint grey stripe down the centre of the rump. Gannets are big, spectacular seabirds which nest in large colonies, chiefly on islands off northwest Britain. The adult's large size, cigar-shaped body, pointed wings with black wingtips and yellowy buff head make them pretty unmistakable. Wandering birds can be seen almost anywhere around the British coast. Young birds, however, are mainly brown, but are told from large shearwaters and immature gulls by their large size and distinctive shape. In particular, notice how they're pointed at all four corners: pointed bill, pointed tail, and pointed wingtips. Cormorants are widespread around British coasts, and there are a few inland breeding colonies. Breeding birds are glossy black with a yellowy patch around the face, a white chin and a white thigh patch. This pose, with the wings seemingly hung out to dry, is typical of cormorants and shags. Immatures are much browner above and have a lot of white on the underparts. Shags are seldom seen away from the coast, and unlike their close relative the cormorant, there are no inland colonies. Adults are dark birds, but the green cast of their plumage isn't really evident here. At the start of the breeding season they have a curly crest, but this is soon lost. The yellow facial patch is smaller than on the cormorant, and it doesn't reach to the eye, and they never have a white thigh patch. Young birds are browner than cormorants, the underparts are pale rather than white, and there's a pale panel on the forewing. When the two species are seen together, the difference in size is striking, and note also the thinner bill of shag. Grey herons can be seen at almost any wet habitat. This is the only common heron in Britain. They're large, rather stately birds, which are easily recognised by their long neck and grey and white coloration. There's some black on the head and neck, and at the shoulder. Juveniles are similar to adults, but have duller plumage, with the upper parts being faintly brownish, and the black on the head and neck being less clear-cut. They fly with the neck pulled in and slow beats of their deeply bowed wings. Although there are few too many records for purple herons to qualify as a genuinely rare bird in Britain, they're still very close to being one. They are darker and a bit smaller than grey herons, with a more snake-like neck. They have a purple, not black, patch at the shoulder, and the thighs are also purple. The bill is more dagger-like than grey herons. Bitterns are birds of wet reed beds and are rare breeding birds in Britain, but become slightly commoner in winter. They're a bit smaller than grey herons and quite differently coloured. The plumage is a complex mixture of black, brown and buff, which gives them an excellent camouflage. Breeding birds have a deep booming note which carries a surprisingly long way. Little egrets used to be only rare visitors, but they've recently colonised southern Britain, with breeding first recorded in 1996. The only birds they can really be confused with are the much rarer great white egret and cattle egret. But the bill and legs of little egret are black, and although they're often muddy or hidden beneath the water, the feet are yellow. Spoonbills are scarce visitors to Britain, seen chiefly in the south and east of England. The key feature of this species is the long bill with its spatulate tip. Once that's been seen, they can't really be confused with anything else. They usually feed by wading around and sweeping the bill from side to side. Breeding adults have a shaggy crest, a yellow tip to the bill, and a yellowy band on the chest. Common cranes are in fact rare birds in Britain, with a tiny resident population in East Anglia, plus occasional migrants turning up elsewhere. They can be mistaken for a grey heron, but have a mainly black head with a white streak running back from the eye, plus a pronounced bustle at the rear. Juveniles have a much plainer head. Unlike herons, they fly with the neck stretched out in front. They have loud bugling calls. Mute swans are familiar birds nesting on a wide variety of lakes, rivers and ponds. Adult mute swans have a mainly orange bill with a round black area above it being known as the knob. Males have a larger bill knob than females. The neck is often held in a graceful curve. Juveniles are dull grey-brown birds, and they gradually acquire white adult plumage, with the bill changing from grey to orange. They're powerful flyers, and in flight their wings make a rhythmic throbbing noise. Two other species of swans occur in Britain, but only as winter visitors. Buick swans are the smaller of the two. They have a more southerly range in Britain than the next species, hooper swan, though it isn't too unusual to see them both together. As well as being a smaller size, Buick swans also have a shorter neck, and the yellow patch on the bill is smaller and more rounded than on hooper swan. Hooper swans tend to winter further north in Britain than Buick swans do, with most of them in Scotland. They're a similar size to a mute swan, but are readily told from them by the yellow, not orange, on the bill. The yellow patch is pointed, not rounded, as on Buick swan. Young birds are more evenly grey than young mute swans and lack the blackish bill base seen on mute swan. They're very similar to young Buick swans, but the pale area at the base of the bill has a pointed shape reminiscent of an adult. Pink-footed geese are winter visitors and are most likely to be seen in central and southern Scotland, parts of northern England and in North Norfolk. This is a relatively small and compact goose with a short, thick neck and a short bill. The bill is dark with a variable amount of pink, and the head and neck are dark. The feet are pink, though of course you can't see that here. In flight, the dark head and neck are usually noticeable, and the upper wing is mainly pale. They have a short, trumpeting call. Bean geese are only scarce winter visitors to Britain, chiefly to Norfolk, but with a few in Scotland. They're similar to pink-footed geese, but are larger and have orange legs and a variable amount of orange on the bill. The bill is distinctly longer than on pink-footed goose. In flight they have a dark forewing, a contrast with the pale forewing of pink-footed goose. There's a small breeding population of grey-lag geese in Scotland, but introduced birds are found in many other areas, and some wild birds winter here. This is a big, angular goose with a large orange or sometimes pink bill and pink legs. They're the descendant of domesticated geese, so their calls have a familiar farmyard ring to them. Flying birds show a conspicuous pale area on the forewing, and if you see them from below, there's also a pale area on the underwing. White-fronted geese from Greenland and Russia visit Britain in the winter. The Greenland birds are seen mainly in Scotland and Ireland and have orange bills, whilst the pink-billed Russian birds are more likely to be seen in Wales and England. The white forehead and dark barring on the belly of adult white-fronted geese makes them relatively easy to identify. However, young birds lack these markings and they can be more difficult. The youngster shown here has developed some white on the forehead, but otherwise looks rather similar to a bean goose, though it lacks the dark bill markings of that species. Flying geese can be difficult to identify. White-fronted geese are rather dark birds and have a yelping call. Canada geese were introduced into Britain from North America about 300 years ago and are now a familiar part of our bird life. This is a big, powerful goose which penetrates right into cities if there are suitable parks and lakes. The combination of brown body, black head and neck with white chin strap makes them easy birds to identify. They have resonant, honking calls. Barnacle geese breed in the Arctic and large numbers winter in Britain, especially in Scotland. This is a small and highly attractive goose. They aren't much bigger than a mallard. The white face is their key identification feature and contrasts with the black head, neck and belly. The rest of their plumage is an attractive mixture of silvery grey and white. They are sociable and very vocal birds, and the call is often likened to the distant barking of a pack of small dogs. Brent geese breed in the high Arctic and winter on coastal marshes and estuaries. They're very much coastal birds, with inland records being unusual. This is our smallest goose, about the same size as a mallard. A light-bellied variety winters chiefly in Ireland, and the dark-bellied birds, shown here, winter mainly in southern and eastern England. They have a guttural call. Bar-headed geese are Asian birds which are fairly common in collections and sometimes escape. The plumage is pale grey, but their most striking feature is the dark bars which run across the head. The legs and bill are yellowy orange. They are unlikely to be confused with any other species. Snow geese breed in North America, and in the normal course of events, there are only rare vagrants to Europe. However, they are common birds in captivity, and most of the birds seen here are in fact escapes. They occur in two colour varieties. White morph birds are all white except for the black wingtips. Blue morph birds are blue-grey with a white head. Egyptian geese aren't native to Britain. They were introduced and are now well established in East Anglia, with a few birds elsewhere. This is an odd-looking bird with dark eye patches, a small dark belly patch and large white wing patches. Those wing patches are very conspicuous in flight, and they show well here. Shelduck are dumpy, rather goose-like ducks, which are seen chiefly around coasts and estuaries, but are increasingly colonising inland areas. The colourful and contrasting plumage makes them difficult birds to overlook. The only similar duck is Drake's shoveler, but it's a different shape and has chestnut flanks. Female shelducks are slightly smaller than males. The chestnut breastband is narrower and they lack the reddish basal knob to the bill. Mandarin ducks are Asian birds which have been introduced to Britain, mainly in the south, and are now accepted on the official British list. The drake's plumage is too exotic to confuse with any other British bird, particularly the bold white above the eye and the orange whiskers. Females are greyer, less colourful birds with dappled flanks and distinct white spectacles. The North American wood duck sometimes escapes from collections and looks very similar, but has more white on the chin and around the eyes. Mallard are easily the commonest and most widespread member of the wildfowl family in Britain. They are large and rather stocky ducks. The male's mixture of yellow bill, green head and neck, white neck ring and purplish-brown breastband pick them out readily enough. The drooped wing exposes the glossy blue speculum, a feature of both males and females. The brown plumage has rather coarse dark markings. The legs are orangey, the rather dark bill has variable orangey markings. Although a few widgeon breed in Britain, they are much commoner as winter visitors, favouring muddy coasts, inland lakes and flooded grasslands. Drakes show a distinctive contrast between their chestnut head and neck and the yellowy crown. The rest of the plumage is mainly grey, but with a white belly, a black rear end and a pointed tail. Females can be quite rufous. Note their grey bill with a dark tip, the dark legs and the obvious white belly. They are gregarious birds and usually occur in flocks or in small groups. The white belly shows well in flight, but the male's white wing panel is even more eye-catching. They have an evocative, far-carrying whistle. Pintail are rather similar to widgeon in that both species are much commoner as winter visitors and both are fond of muddy coasts. Drake pintails have a chocolate-coloured head and a white breast which extends up the neck in a white stripe. Females look much like any other brown duck, but aren't too difficult to pick out. They're delicate birds with neatly marked plumage, a thin neck and a small head. The head and neck are almost unmarked and the bill is grey. Gadwall are widespread, though not really numerous in Britain, and their relatively dull plumage means they're easily overlooked. Males are grey birds, but with blackish markings on the breast and a black rear end. Females do a reasonably good job of impersonating a female mallard, but they're a bit smaller, with a whitish belly, orange sides to the bill, and less heavily marked plumage. They also have a white speculum, as opposed to the blue one of mallard. Shovelers are rather scarce breeding birds, but are widespread winter visitors to lowland freshwater sites. Their bright plumage picks the males out. Even if the spatulate bill can't really be seen, the combination of green head, white breast and chestnut belly and flanks readily identifies them. Females also have a spatulate bill. It seems so heavy that it almost drags the head down. But one feature that you can't see here is the blue-grey forewing and the green speculum. Teal are the smallest British duck. They nest in marshes and by moorland pools, but this is another species which is commonest as a winter visitor. Males have a chestnut and green head, though in dull light it simply looks dark. The yellowy undertail coverts normally stand out well. They also have a white line along the edge of the upper parts. They have a penetrating cricket-like call. The small size of the females separates them from most other ducks. The fairly uniform head markings aren't easy to see as this bird dabbles for food, but you can just see the green speculum. And note also the white mark along the edge of the undertail. Gargany are another small duck, and they are particularly noticeable for being only a summer visitor, with a scarce and localised distribution. Males are well marked. The bold white stripe above the eye runs down onto the neck, in contrast with the brownish head and neck. The flanks are pale grey. In flight they show a blue-grey forewing and a green speculum. Females are very similar to female teal, but they have a more contrasting face pattern. They have a pale supercilium, a dark line through the eye, a pale spot at the base of the bill, and a dark bar on the cheeks. Tufted ducks are the commonest of the diving ducks in Britain. Males are conspicuously black and white birds, and as their name suggests, they have a drooping crest. The grey bill has a blackish tip, and the eye is yellow. Females are brown with slightly paler flanks. The crest is shorter than the males. Some birds, but not this one, have white at the base of the bill, so they can be confused with the next species, the scaup. Scaup are rare breeding birds in Britain and are far more likely to be seen at the coast in winter, though they sometimes turn up inland. Males are very similar to male tufted ducks, but are slightly bigger. The back is pale grey, and they don't have a crest. In good light, the head has a greenish gloss, but that can't really be seen here. Females have a bold white patch at the base of the bill. Tufted ducks often show some white, but it's seldom as extensive as on scaup. And remember that scaup never have a crest, but they do often show a diagnostic pale patch on the ear coverts. Pochard are scarce breeding birds in Britain, but are common winter visitors to freshwater lakes and reservoirs. Males are tricoloured birds with a chestnut head, grey body and black breast and rear end. The longish bill is emphasised by the gently sloping forehead. Females have the same head shape. In summer they are mainly brown, but in winter the body feathers have a frosty grey appearance. The face is pale and there's a pale eye ring. Red-crested pochard are scarce visitors to Britain, and this is a common bird in wildfowl collections, and many of the birds seen are either escapes or of feral origin. Males are one of the brightest of ducks. They have an orange head, a contrasting black neck and breast, and a brilliant red bill. They are unlikely to be mistaken for anything else, but females look like female common scoters, though they have some pink on the bill and a long pale wing bar. Common eider are widespread around British coasts, though it's really only in Scotland and parts of northern England that they're common. Males are large, dumpy and strikingly pied birds. The head is an odd triangular shape. The bill is pale green, and there's a diagnostic green patch on the side of the neck. They are gregarious birds and can be seen in flocks or small groups at any time of the year. They have a distinctive crooning call. Females are brown birds, but there's a lot of variation in the exact tone of the plumage. Some look quite rufous, but others, like this bird, are noticeably greyer. King-eiders are Arctic birds, which are very rare birds across most of Britain, but every year one or two mix with the common eiders in northern Scotland. Adult males are told from common eiders by their lavender grey crown and nape and their black, not white back. The bill is reddish orange. Females are extremely difficult to tell from female common eiders, but they have a happier facial expression and the feathering cuts into the bill base in a blunt shape, whereas on common eider it has a pointed shape. Long-tailed ducks are winter visitors to British coasts. They are reasonably common in Scotland, but are much scarcer by the time you reach southern England. Non-breeding plumage is mostly pale, but they have a distinctive dark cheek patch, and there's a pink band on the bill. The dark breastband shows well on flying birds, and note that both the upper and underwing are dark. Females are darker birds and lack the elongated central tail feathers. They do have a pale patch around the eye. Males have yodeling calls. Common scoter are rare breeding birds in northern Britain, but in winter they can be seen almost anywhere around the British coast. Males are all black except for a yellow patch on the bill, which can stand out at surprisingly long distances. Like other sea duck, they do occasionally turn up inland. In flight, they are most noticeable for the lack of any distinctive wing markings. Females are brown rather than black, with the cheeks being slightly paler. Velvet scoters are also winter visitors around our coasts, but they're distinctly scarcer than common scoters. This is another dark bird, though males do have a small but noticeable white eye patch, and females have a couple of indistinct whitish cheek patches. Both sexes have an eider-like triangular head shape. There is obvious yellow on the male's bill. Flying birds are easily told from common scoters, and indeed from other dark waterfowl, by the obvious white secondaries which stand out well even at long range. Surf scoters are North American birds which occasionally turn up in Britain, usually in northern and eastern Scotland. They will mix in with other scoters. This male is with velvet scoters and is picked out by the large white patch on the back of the neck. Plus there's another white patch on the forehead. Females lack these bold white patches, but they do have two indistinct white patches on the side of the face. This means they look like velvet scoters, but they lack the white wing patch of that species. Golden eyes breed in small numbers in Scotland, but are seen throughout Britain in winter, using both inland and coastal waters. The male's pied plumage makes them conspicuous. The white face patch stands out and the dark head has a green gloss. Females have a grey body and a brown head, and the eye isn't as bright yellow as the male's. Both sexes have a bold white wing patch. You can just see a hint of it on this bird. Smew are scarce winter visitors to Britain. Southeastern Britain is the favoured area, but there are only a few regular sights for them. Adult males are one of the most beautiful ducks. The plumage is a mixture of white, pale grey and some black. Females and young birds are known as redheads. There's a slight suggestion of a crest and the chin is white. Red-breasted mergansers nest in northern and western Britain. In winter they can be seen almost anywhere around the British coast and occasionally turn up inland. Males have a dark green head, an orangey breastband with darker streaking, a dark back and grey flanks. Like their close relative the goosander, they have a long, thin red bill, which is used for catching fish. Females have a grey body and a gingery head and neck. Both sexes have a wispy crest, which often looks untidy, if not downright scruffy. Flying birds have bold white patches on the upper wing. Goosander breed in northern Britain and parts of Wales, and in winter they are widespread on lowland rivers, lakes and reservoirs. They're slightly bigger and bulkier than red-breasted mergansers, and males are much whiter. The body is mainly white and often has a salmon-pink tinge to it. The green head simply looks dark at any sort of distance. Females are much like female red-breasted mergansers. The body is grey and the head and neck are ginger brown. In a direct comparison you can see that goosanders have a more clear-cut white chin and a sharper division between the grey body and the brown neck. And note also the wispier crest of red-breasted merganser. Ruddy ducks aren't native to Britain. They are North American birds which have escaped from captivity and have established an expanding population here. As usual, males are much brighter than females, and the combination of chestnut body, darker head, white cheeks and blue bill make them easy birds to identify. Females are dull brownish birds. Their pale cheeks make them look a bit grebe-like. The dark bar across the cheek isn't seen on any grebe, and the tail is too long for a grebe. The key area for red kites used to be central Wales, and although this is still the best area to see them, they are being reintroduced to England and Scotland. Soaring overhead, their most obvious features are the forked tail and the whitish patches on the outer wing. This bird is molting its flight feathers so the wings look a bit untidy. They're told from common buzzards by their slightly larger size, rufous colouring and forked tail. Marsh harriers are mainly summer visitors to Britain, favouring sites with large reed beds in the southeast. Like other harriers, they hunt by slowly quartering the ground with the wings held in a shallow V. Females and young males are brown birds, but with obvious creamy yellow on the head, so they're often referred to as cream crowns. Adult males are strikingly tricoloured birds. Montagu's harriers are rare summer visitors to Britain, with a few pairs nesting in southern England. They are birds of heaths and grassland. Adult males are grey birds with black wingtips. They're told from the next species, the hen harrier, by the black bars on both the upper side and the underside of the inner wing. The black bars on the underwing can just be seen here. If we move on a few frames, you can see the black bar on the upper wing. Females and juveniles are brown birds with a white band on the upper tail which earns them the name ringtail. Telling them from hen harriers is a real challenge, but Montagu's harriers have a better developed facial pattern, a slimmer build and a narrower white rump. Hen harriers are scarce breeding birds on the uplands of northern Britain. In winter they move to lowland areas, often close to the coast. Adult males are pale grey birds with sharply contrasting black wingtips. They normally look a bit heavier and broader winged than the equivalent plumage of Montagu's harrier. The white rump is a bit more prominent and the face isn't well marked and tends to look a bit owl-like. Sparrowhawks are the second commonest raptor in Britain, but their dashing low-level flight means that brief views are often all you get. They nest in woodland and hunt along woodland rides, hedgerows and gardens in search of small birds. Adult males are bluish above and orangey below. Females and young birds are browner. The upper parts are fairly plain, except for a pale supercilium and nape patch, and the underparts are barred. They're sometimes seen soaring and are told from kestrels by their blunt, not pointed wingtips. Goshawks are rare breeding birds, favouring dense woodland where they can be surprisingly inconspicuous. They're easiest to see in spring when they perform courtship flights. As well as being bigger than sparrowhawks, they're also deeper chested with a more hooded appearance. Female goshawks really are big birds. They're about the same size as a common buzzard. The common buzzard is the commonest large raptor in Britain, though they're still scarce birds in many parts of eastern England. This is a rather bulky general-purpose raptor which lives in a variety of landscapes and can cope with a variety of foods. The plumage is highly variable, but the bird shown here is reasonably typical. In particular, the pale semicircle across the breast is seen on most common buzzards. They soar effortlessly on broad wings which are held in a shallow V. The tail is rather short. They have a mewing call. Rough-legged buzzards are very scarce winter visitors from Scandinavia, seen chiefly in eastern Britain. They're slightly larger than common buzzards and have noticeably longer wings. The key feature which distinguishes them from common buzzards is the broad, dark tail bar, but note also the contrast between the pale head and upper breast and the dark belly. They sometimes hover persistently, though not on this occasion. Honey buzzards are rare summer visitors to Britain, with a few pairs breeding in southern Britain. They are easily confused with common buzzards, but have longer wings and tail, a small head on a protruding neck, and they soar on level wings. Not slightly raised as in common buzzard. The plumage is extremely variable, but most show some barring on the underbody and a dark mark on the bend of the wing. Golden eagles are virtually restricted to Scotland, but a single pair also nest in the Lake District. Common buzzards are often mistaken for golden eagles, but a real eagle is so much bigger and longer winged that you'll know one when you're watching the real thing. The pale nape often shows up well. Young birds have white patches in the wings and tail and take several years before they reach adult plumage. White-tailed eagles have recently been reintroduced into Scotland, and a few pairs breed on West Coast islands. This is a huge bird, much bigger than the marsh harrier, which mobs it in a minute. The wings are very broad and almost rectangular in shape. The head and neck project markedly and are pale on adults. The short, wedge-shaped tail is white. Ospreys are rare but increasingly summer visitors to Scotland. Elsewhere in Britain they're only scarce passage migrants. This is a large raptor, a bit bigger than a common buzzard, but not as large as an eagle. The wings are relatively narrow and have a slightly bow-winged flight action. Their brown upperparts and white underparts can make them look a bit gull-like, but the pale crown, dark eye stripe and dark patch on the bend of the wing separate them. The kestrel is our commonest bird of prey. They're often seen hovering over motorway verges and even turn up in the middle of cities. They're one of the smaller members of the falcon family, and like all falcons, they have pointed wingtips. The easiest distinction from hawks, which have blunt wingtips. Kestrels will hunt from a perch, but it is their persistent hovering which really picks them out. The greyish head and grey tail with a black tip show this bird to be a male. Females and young birds are brown with blackish barring, and the underparts are paler with dark streaking. Merlins are scarce breeding birds on British uplands, moving to lowland areas, particularly coastal ones, in the winter. This is a small and elusive falcon. Often all you see of a merlin is a small and compact falcon racing low across the ground. Hobbies are scarce summer visitors to Britain and have recently extended their breeding range northwards to northern England. They have blue-grey upperparts and obvious black moustache. Even at rest you can see that the wings are long and pointed, but from this angle you can't see the diagnostic rufous vent feathering. They are superb flyers. This bird is feeding on insects, but they're capable of catching swifts, swallows and even bats. The white cheeks contrast with the dark crown and streaked underparts. Peregrines are the largest falcons seen in Britain. They breed in upland areas and on coastal cliffs. The upper parts are dark blue-grey. The crown is darker and they have a black moustache. The underparts are white with dark barring. They're bigger than hobbies with a stockier, more barrel-chested appearance, and they lack the extreme agility of the hobby. Red grouse are found on heather moorlands and are quite common in areas of suitable habitat. The plumage is warm brown with fine dark barring. Males have a red comb over the eye. The male's guttural call is one of the characteristic sounds of heather moorland. Females aren't as rufous and lack the red eyebrow. The white leg feathering and limited white on the flanks can be seen here. Ptarmigan are restricted to the mountains of central and northern Scotland. Breeding ptarmigan have a mixture of grey and white feathering. Indeed, the underbody and wings are mostly white. In winter, they become a mainly white bird, which gives them excellent camouflage. Females can be mistaken for a red grouse, but there's always some white on the body and a lot of white on the wings. Black grouse are another upland game bird. Males have some white on the wings and the undertail and a red comb above the eye. The tail is a very distinctive lyre shape. In spring they gather at communal lek sites, where the males display with bubbling and hissing calls. Females are greyer than female red grouse. The slightly notched tail is a bit longer than red grouse's, and grey hens show a faint whitish wing bar in flight. Capercaillie are huge turkey-sized birds with a small population in the coniferous forests of central Scotland. Despite their size, they can be very difficult birds to see and are best looked for in spring when the males display with a variety of popping and retching sounds. Males can really only be confused with male black grouse, but capercaillie are much bigger, lack a white wing bar and have a rounded, not lyre-shaped tail. Although male capercaillie have some white on the undertail coverts, it's quite different from the all-white undertail coverts of black grouse. Females are brown birds, much smaller than the males, but larger than other grouse. They have a distinctive rufous breastband, though that can't be seen from this angle. Red-legged partridge were introduced into Britain in the 1700s and are well-established farmland birds, though absent from the north and west. They can easily be confused with grey partridges, but the white throat is bordered with black. They have a gorget of black streaking, and the flanks have tricoloured barring, with the white bars standing out clearly. The red legs are often difficult to see. They are more vocal than grey partridge. Grey partridge are still fairly common birds on British farmland, though their numbers have declined a great deal recently. The sexes are similar, but the females are duller. The face is orangey. There's a rufous barring on the flanks and the underparts are grey, but with a dark patch on the lower belly. The completely different face pattern is the best distinction from red-legged partridge. The call has a grating tone to it. Quail are tiny, starling-sized game birds which are only rare summer visitors to British farmland. They can be confused with young partridge, but quail have relatively long and narrow wings and don't have any red on the tail. However, you will do well to see a quail because they normally stay well hidden in crops. Their presence is often only revealed by the male's persistent call, usually rendered as "whet my lips." Pheasants were introduced into Britain many years ago for sporting purposes. Males are unmistakable, but their colours can be very variable. Many show a white neck ring, but some don't. The crowing call is accompanied by vigorous wing flapping. Females are essentially brown birds, though with darker speckling, and like the male, they have a long pointed tail. Water rails are birds of marshes and reed beds, and their shy, secretive habits mean that they are heard more than they're seen. The upper parts are brown with darker streaking. The underparts and face are grey, and there is black and white streaking on the flanks. A long, thin, mainly red bill separates them from moorhens and crakes. The most frequent call is a pig-like squealing. Spotted crakes are rare summer visitors to marshes and wetlands, with a few more occurring as passage migrants. Their small size and inconvenient habit of staying deep inside cover makes them difficult to see. They sometimes wander out into the open, and you can see the short orangey bill and the lightly spotted plumage. They can be confused with water rails, but spotted crakes have greenish legs and a much shorter bill. Males have a far-carrying whiplash call, which is heard mainly at night. Corncrakes are rare summer visitors, mainly to northwest Scotland. They were once much commoner, and the occasional migrant does still turn up on coastal sites. The plumage is brown with more rufous wings and some grey on the face and underparts. They're always difficult birds to see, but breeding males give distinctive grating calls. Moorhens are familiar birds on lowland freshwater sites, ranging from the smallest of ponds to the vegetation around larger reservoirs. Adults are mainly blackish birds, but with a white flank stripe, greenish legs, a bright red and yellow bill, and white under tail coverts. Youngsters are much duller and can be mistaken for a rare crake, but have a white chin, a dull white flank stripe and some white on the undertail. Coot are nearly as common as moorhens, but prefer larger, more open waters. They're a bit bigger than moorhens, but are best told from them by the white beak with a white frontal shield above it. The rest of their plumage is black, without any trace of white on the flanks or under tail coverts. They have sharp calls. Juveniles are much more contrasty than young moorhens. Indeed, they can look a bit grebe-like, but have a dumpier shape, and in particular, a much dumpier bill. Oystercatchers are resident birds seen mainly around the coast, but increasingly feeding and nesting inland along river valleys. The combination of black and white plumage, orange-red bill and pink legs makes this a genuinely unmistakable bird. In winter, they develop a thin white collar. Flying birds show a bold white wing bar and invariably give their loud, penetrating call. Avocets breed at several sites in southeastern Britain, with some moving to the southwest in winter. This is another highly distinctive wader. The only vaguely similar wader is the oystercatcher, but that has much more black and a straight orange bill. However, distant avocets are surprisingly easy to overlook as gulls. They have a fluty call. Stone curlews are rare summer visitors to sandy heaths and farmland in East Anglia. They are mainly active at dusk, dawn and through the night when their curlew-like calls reveal their presence. Their superb camouflage makes them difficult to see, but the odd reptilian appearance means they're pretty unmistakable when you do. Ring plovers are the commonest of the smaller plovers in Britain. A mainly coastal bird, they're breeding at inland sites in increasing numbers. Breeding adults have blackish head and breast markings and a white eyebrow. The legs are orange and the orange bill has a dark tip. They have a typically dumpy and short-billed plover shape. Juveniles are similar to non-breeding adults, but the upper part's feathers have fine, pale fringes. The call is a slurred whistle. Little ring plovers are only summer visitors to Britain. This is not a coastal bird. They prefer inland freshwater sites such as gravel diggings. They're easily confused with ring plovers, but are smaller, slimmer birds, and at close range the prominent yellow eye ring is an easy distinction. Unlike ring plovers, they don't have a wing bar. and the call is a distinctive pew. Kentish plovers used to breed in Britain, but are now only scarce visitors. Breeding males have a rufous cap, some black on the head, and black patches on the breast sides. Kentish plovers are closely related to ringed plovers, but are a bit paler, and the blackish, not orangey legs are diagnostic. The incomplete breast band is similar to juvenile ringed plovers, but is an obvious difference from adult ringed plovers. Dotterel are rare breeding birds on the mountain tops of the Scottish Highlands. However, they're more likely to be seen on migration when small groups stop off at traditional sites. They have a dark belly patch, a pale line across the breast, and a long white supercilium. They're unusual birds in that the role of the sexes is reversed, with males being duller than females, and the males are responsible for incubating the eggs and looking after the young. Golden plovers are widespread breeding birds on the uplands of northern Britain. Breeding birds have black on the underparts, which reaches up onto the face to a variable extent. The upper part's feathers are dark, but with lovely golden yellow speckling. In winter they lose the black underparts and move to lowland farmland and coastal areas. The call is sad and far-carrying. Grey plovers don't breed in Britain, but are fairly common winter visitors to muddy and sandy coasts. They're seldom seen inland. They are greyer birds and a bit bigger, stockier and heavier build than golden plovers, but they can be confused. The easiest way to tell them apart is in flight. Grey plovers have a black patch in the armpit, quite different from the whitish underwing of golden plover. The call is a penetrating, mournful whistle. Although lapwing numbers have declined, they're still reasonably common on farmland and open country. They have a wispy crest, and the dark upper parts show up as a metallic greenish colour in good light. In spring they perform an acrobatic song flight. They're instantly recognisable in flight thanks to the contrasty plumage, rounded wingtips and floppy wing beats. The dunlin is the commonest of the smaller sandpipers. This can be a confusing group of birds, so it's worth making sure you're thoroughly familiar with this rather variable small wader. Breeding birds are easy to identify, as they're the only small wader with a black belly. Juveniles, however, are more confusing. The upper part's feathers are dark with buff and chestnut edgings, and most birds have at least a trace of a white V. The underparts have a dark streaking, which is a bit reminiscent of the breeding adult's black belly. Non-breeding plumage is grey above, whitish below. The legs and moderately decurved bill are black, and they often have a rather necklace appearance. The call is shrill and slightly rasping. Knot are a size up from dunlin. They breed in the high Arctic and are common winter visitors to British estuaries. In non-breeding plumage they're slightly dumpy grey birds with a faint supercilium and grey chevrons on the flanks. They are very gregarious birds and often gather into large flocks which wheel around together at high tide. Sanderling are another high Arctic wader that doesn't breed in Britain, but winters here in large numbers. They're found on sandy beaches, often in groups, and race around after the retreating waves in search of food. They're about the same size as dunlin, but are a shade paler and have a shorter, straighter bill. Purple sandpipers are winter visitors to rocky coasts. They're quite common in northeastern Britain, distinctly scarcer in the southwest. They seldom look purple, but they are a dark slaty colour. They're a bit bigger and plumper than a dunlin, and are best separated by their yellow legs and the yellow base to the bill. The call is a short chirp. Curlew sandpipers are only seen on migration through Britain. This autumn adult has a mixture of grey winter feathers and rufous breeding ones. The only other wader with rufous breeding plumage is the knot, which is larger, straighter billed and shorter legged. Juveniles are easily overlooked amongst a group of dunlin, but are a bit larger and have longer legs and a longer, more decurved bill. The upper parts are neatly scalloped and the underparts are plain except for a buff wash on the breast. In flight they show a diagnostic white rump. Various North American waders turn up in Britain as rarities. The pectoral sandpiper is the commonest, though it's still a pretty rare bird, seen mainly in the autumn. They're a bit bigger than a dunlin. A couple of white lines on the upper parts, and the streaking on the neck and breast is cut off abruptly from the white belly. The yellowy legs and yellowy base to the bill are partly obscured by mud on this bird. The little stint is another species that only occurs as a migrant in Britain. This is the smallest of our regular waders. Seen with dunlin, they do indeed look little. Breeding birds have rufous upper parts, rufous cheeks and whitish underparts. Juveniles have white lines on the upper parts and whitish underparts without the belly spotting seen on juvenile dunlin. They also have a more energetic feeding action than dunlin. The legs and bill are blackish. Temmink stints are noticeably scarcer in Britain than little stints. This is a small, unobtrusive wader with dark blotches on the brownish upper parts. The relatively pale yellowy legs are the key feature, separating them from little stint. If flush, they have a trilling call, quite unlike the short call of little stint. A few pairs of ruff nest in Britain, but they're far more likely to be seen as passage migrants. Males are noticeably larger than females, and in breeding plumage they have elaborate and variably coloured head plumes, but sadly we don't see much of them in Britain in this plumage. Non-breeding birds are rather grey. Leg colour can vary from green to orange, and they can look quite like a redshank. But the upper parts are scalier, the face is rather pale, and in flight they show only a thin wing bar and a bit of white at the base of the tail. Common snipe are reasonably common wherever there's suitable marshy and boggy ground. The heavily streaked plumage gives them excellent camouflage, but out in the open like this you can see the whitish belly. The bill is very long and is used to probe deep into the mud. In spring they display high in the sky with acrobatic dives when the outer tail feathers produce a drumming sound. Jack snipe are only winter visitors to Britain, and they're distinctly scarcer and more difficult to see than their larger cousin. Often all that you can see is a small snipe which flies a short distance without the zigzagging flight of common snipe and then drops into cover. However, as this one crouches, you can see the dark upper parts with two golden stripes plus the two golden lines above the eye and a shorter bill than common snipe. They have a curious bobbing habit, a bit like a clockwork toy. Woodcock breed in woodland across most of Britain, with more arriving to spend the winter here. They look distinctly snipe-like, but are larger, plumper birds. Their camouflage is so good that seeing one on the ground is very difficult. One noticeable feature is the cross-barring on the head. Snipe have striped heads. They're easiest to see in spring when males display over woodland in roding flights with jerky wing beats and odd calls. A small number of black-tailed godwits breed in Britain, but they're much more widespread on passage, and some estuaries have favoured wintering sites. This is a tall, handsome wader with an orangey head, neck and upper breast in breeding plumage. This bird isn't in full breeding plumage. The upper parts still have to develop more rufous feathering. In winter they have plain grey upper parts. The underparts are paler whitish, and the pink base of the long bill usually stands out clearly. The black tail can't be seen here, but it contrasts clearly with the white rump, and they also have bold white wing bars. Bar-tailed godwits are only winter visitors to Britain, and are widespread on sandy and muddy coasts, but seldom seen inland. They bear an obvious resemblance to the black-tailed godwit, but have browner and slightly streaked upper parts, a gently up-curved bill and shorter legs. Identification is easiest in flight. Bar-tailed godwits have a white rump extending in a V up the back, and unlike black-tailed godwits, they don't have a white wing bar. The curlew is Britain's largest wader. In summer they breed on moorlands and meadows. In winter they favour wetlands, particularly coastal ones. The large size, strongly curved bill and heavily streaked plumage means that they're relatively easy birds to identify. They have a beautiful bubbling song. Flying birds have a white wedge on the back, and they often give that distinctive curlew call. Although whimbrel do breed in northern Scotland, they're more familiar as a passage migrant. This is very much a small version of the curlew, but at closer range you can see the different head pattern. Whimbrel have a pale supercilium, a pale stripe down the middle of the crown with dark feathering on either side of it. Curlew have a much more uniform head pattern. The typical call of whimbrel is a diagnostic tittering trill. Common redshanks breed in fair numbers in Britain, but are commoner on migration and in winter. This is the commonest medium-sized wader. Breeding birds are brown above with darker barring and paler below, but with darker streaking and spotting. Non-breeding birds are plainer and greyer, but at all ages and seasons the combination of red or reddish legs and bill base, broad white wing patch and penetrating call identify common redshank. Spotted redshanks don't breed in Britain, but they're widespread, though never common, passage migrants, and a few winter here. Breeding birds have a wonderful blackish plumage, but are a rare sight here. We're more likely to see dusky juveniles with their neatly spotted upper parts and barred underparts. In non-breeding plumage, they're paler and greyer than common redshanks. They have a prominent white supercilium in front of the eye, a long, thin bill and long legs. They lack the white wing panel seen on common redshank, and the call is quite different. Small numbers of greenshanks nest in the uplands of Scotland, and they're regular passage migrants across most of Britain. This is a rather pale greyish wader. Stockier than either of the redshanks, they do indeed have greenish legs. The bill is slightly up-tilted, and the ringing choo-choo-choo call soon picks them out. Common sandpipers are summer visitors to upland streams, lakes and rivers, and occur throughout Britain as passage migrants. This is a bird that is easier to pick out by its odd, nervous bobbing than by its plumage. The upper parts are olive brown, the underparts are white, and they have some dark streaking on the breast. A white wedge between the wing and the breast markings is always noticeable. The shrill call is usually repeated several times. Green sandpipers are bred in Britain, but are mainly passage migrants, with some spending the winter here. Although this trio are feeding out in the open, they usually keep close to cover or feed along sheltered edges. This is a dark wader with some pale spotting on the upper parts and gleaming white underparts. They're often flushed at close range when they show a square white patch on the upper tail, blackish underwings, and give a ringing call. There are a few pairs of wood sandpipers in Scotland, but they are better known as scarce passage migrants at freshwater sites. They're very similar to green sandpipers, but are slightly smaller with paler, browner upperparts with more speckling. They're a bit longer-legged than green sandpipers, and the legs are paler, yellower colour. Like green sandpipers, they have a white rump, but the underwing isn't as dark, and they have a different call. Turnstones don't breed in Britain, but they're common winter visitors to our coasts. This spring bird is moulting into breeding plumage and shows obvious traces of the richly coloured tortoiseshell upperparts. Non-breeding birds are grey-brown above with orange-yellow legs. The turnstone shape is distinctive. They are stocky, short-legged birds with a relatively short, wedge-shaped bill. Redneck phalaropes breed in small numbers in northern Scotland. Elsewhere in Britain, they are scarce passage migrants. Breeding birds have grey upperparts with two golden lines. They have a whitish chin and throat and a diagnostic rufous neck patch. Like all phalaropes, they're habitual swimmers, and another feature of phalaropes is that females have brighter plumage than the males. Juveniles have dark upperparts with golden lines. There's some buff on the side of the neck and a rectangular dark patch around the eye. Grey phalaropes breed in the high Arctic and are only scarce visitors to Britain, chiefly after gales in the autumn and winter. We invariably see them in either juvenile or non-breeding plumage. This bird is mainly in plain grey winter plumage, but still has a few darker juvenile feathers left. They're slightly smaller than redneck phalaropes, with a thicker bill, which has a small yellowy patch at the base, though the patch is impossible to see on this bird. Arctic skuas breed in northern Scotland and can be seen from coastal headlands as they head south on their autumn migration. Arctic skua occurs in both pale and dark forms, though even the pale ones look fairly dark from a distance. Adults of both forms have white wing flashes and elongated central tail feathers. Their flight is swift and dashing, almost falcon-like, and their greater speed and agility than gulls is usually evident. Pomerine skuas breed well to the north of Britain, but we see them as scarce migrants in both spring and autumn. The plumage is very similar to Arctic skuas, but the elongated tail feathers have rounded spoon-like ends, not pointed ones. However, this bird has lost the tail extensions, which isn't too unusual. Juveniles don't have the tail extensions and are very difficult to tell from the much commoner Arctic skewer. They're heavier chested, broader winged birds, but that's difficult to judge without a fair bit of experience. Long-tailed skewers are only very scarce passage migrants in Britain. This is the smallest of the skewers. As their name suggests, the projecting central tail feathers are extraordinarily long. The dark cap is a bit more restricted than on Arctic skewer. They have the lightest and most graceful flight of any of the skewers. The wings are narrower than on the other skewers, and the white wing flash is small and easily missed. Great skewers, or bonxes as they're also called, are the largest of the skewers. They breed in northern Scotland and are seen on migration around the coast. They're large, dark birds with a short tail, a heavy body and broad wings. The large size is evident in comparison with this gannet. They're about the same size as a herring gull and are told from young gulls by the striking white wing flashes. Black-headed gulls are the commonest British gull. Despite their name, the dark hood of breeding birds is actually chocolate brown. The hood is lost in winter. There are just a couple of dark smudges on the head. In flight, they show a diagnostic white wedge along the front of the outer wing. Young birds have brown wing markings and a dark tail bar. The colour of the bill and legs is paler, more orangey than on adults. Little gulls don't breed in Britain, but they are regular passage migrants. They're sized down from black-headed gulls and have a dark underwing, and breeding birds have a black hood. Non-breeding birds have a dark ear spot and a dark cap. The black wingtip markings show that this bird isn't fully adult. Mediterranean gulls are scarce birds in Britain, and familiarity with the commoner gulls is the key to finding one. Adults are easily overlooked amongst black-headed gulls, but are larger, more robust birds with a thicker bill with all white wingtips. Birds in first winter plumage are more likely to be confused with the common gull, but Mediterranean gulls have reddish legs and a reddish bill base, and a dark mask running back from the eye. Common gulls breed quite widely in northern Britain and are widespread in winter. They are slightly bigger than a black-headed gull and look like a small version of a herring gull, but the legs are yellower, the wings are narrower, and the white spots on mirrors at the wingtips are larger than on herring gull. Birds in their first winter have brown in the wings and tail, plus a bicoloured bill. Again, they look like a small herring gull, but the bill is smaller and the upper parts are a shade darker. Ring-billed gulls are North American birds that turn up as rarities on this side of the Atlantic. They look extremely similar to the equivalent plumages of common gull, but compared to a common gull, the bill is a bit thicker with a wide dark band, and the iris is pale, not dark, and the upper parts are slightly paler grey. Kittiwakes are coastal birds breeding wherever there are suitable cliffs. They rarely stray inland. They often nest in large colonies where the air is full of their striking calls. They look a lot like common gulls, but the legs are dark and they don't have white mirrors on the wingtips. Juveniles have a black W across the wings and a black tail band. Non-breeding adults develop a grey shawl and a blackish spot behind the eye. The contrast between yellowy-green bill and black legs is obvious here. Sabine's gulls breed in the Arctic and are occasionally seen from British coasts. usually in the autumn during onshore gales. This adult still has part of the dark summer hood present. They are particularly striking in flight when they show a tri-coloured upper wing. Some care is needed, however, as from a distance young kittiwakes can look surprisingly similar. The herring gull is the commonest and most widespread of the large gulls. The adults have pale grey upperparts, black wingtips with white spots or mirrors on them, pink legs, a pale iris and a yellow bill with a red spot near the tip. This bird is in its first winter. At this age they are mainly brown birds. Adult plumage is gradually acquired over a period of about 4 years. This second year has grey adult style upperparts. In another year it will look mainly adult, except for some brown wing and tail markings. Until recently, yellow-legged gulls were treated as just a race or subspecies of the herring gull. They breed in southern Europe and are scarce visitors to southern England. The upperparts are a slightly darker shade of grey than on British herring gulls. The wingtips show more black and less white, and as their name suggests, the legs are yellow. Lesser blackback gulls breed at a variety of sites, chiefly in northern Britain, and an increasing number also winter here. Their upper parts are markedly darker than either herring or yellow-legged gulls, and their yellow legs are another difference from herring gulls. They're also slimmer than herring gulls, with longer, narrower, more pointed wings. This is the largest and bulkiest British gull. They breed along northern and western coast, but are much more widespread in winter. They're also bigger than lesser blackbacks. They have a black, not grey back, and the legs are pink, not yellow. Flying birds show more white at the wingtip than lesser blackbacks. The larger size of young birds isn't always obvious, and they can be confused with herring and lesser blackback gulls. However, the bill is heavier, and the head and underparts are normally paler, but this bird is a bit darker than usual. Glaucous gulls are scarce winter visitors to Britain. At all ages and seasons, glaucous gulls and the next species, the Iceland gull, are picked out by their whitish wingtips, and immatures lack the dark tail band seen on the commoner large gulls, such as herring gull landing here. They average slightly larger than a herring gull. Again, the pale wingtip without any black shows up, though during the autumn moult, herring gulls may show very little black on their wingtips. Iceland gulls are also mainly winter visitors to Britain, and are usually even scarcer than glaucous gulls. They average slightly smaller than a glaucous gull, and have a smaller bill, longer primaries, the wings usually project markedly beyond the tail, and a more rounded head. Common terns are the most widespread tern in Britain, though in the north its close relative the Arctic tern is more numerous. They are extremely similar to Arctic terns, but adult common terns have longer legs and a slightly longer bill with a dark tip. Common terns regularly breed at inland sites. Other terns are only occasional passage migrants inland. Juveniles have a white forehead, a pale base to the dark bill, a dark mark at the bend of the wing, and a brownish tone to the upper parts, though this bird is actually a bit greyer than most. Although migrant Arctic terns can be seen anywhere around the British coast and occasionally inland, the main breeding colonies are in the north. They are shorter legged than common terns, and the bill is shorter and deeper red than common tern, and lacks a dark tip. The close similarity of common and Arctic terns means they're often lumped together as comic terns. Here, a juvenile Arctic tern is in the foreground with a juvenile common tern behind it. Arctic terns have only a faint dark wing bar and less of a pale area at the base of the bill. Indeed, the pale area on Arctic terns' bill darkens quickly, and by the time they leave the breeding colony, the bill is often all dark. Roseate terns are rare birds in Britain, nesting at just a few sites. They're paler, whiter birds than either common or Arctic terns, though that shows best in flight when the longer tail streamers are usually apparent. The bill is mainly black, and they can show a pinkish flush to the underparts, though not on this occasion. Sandwich terns breed at colonies around the British coast and are widespread on passage, though seldom straying inland. This is the largest, most robust and also the noisiest British tern. The shaggy black crest, yellow-tipped black bill and grating call identify them fairly easily. Juveniles have distinct black edges to the upper parts feathers. Their bills are shorter than the adults and lack the yellow tip. Juvenile roseate terns are a bit similar, but are much smaller with whiter outer primaries. Little terns nest on sandy beaches which are often used by people, so many of their colonies are protected to prevent disturbance. Breeding birds have a white forehead, a yellow bill and a small black tip and yellowy-orange legs. Their small size is often sufficient to pick them out, and they have faster and more flickery wing beats than the other terns. Black terns occasionally nest in southern England, but they're more familiar as a widespread, though not common, passage migrant. Breeding birds are blackish on the head, neck and underparts, greyer on the back and wings. Adults molting out of breeding plumage can show blotchy white areas, particularly around the face. They're buoyant and graceful flyers. Guillemots nest right down to southern England, though the largest colonies are in Scotland. Guillemots have blackish-brown upperparts. The bill is long and rather narrow, and there's some messy streaking on the flanks. A minority of guillemots have a white ring around the eye and are known as bridal guillemots. Razorbills have a similar British range to guillemots. The upper parts are black and there's a white line running from the bill to the eye. The bill is much deeper and blunter than on a guillemot, and there's a white band across the bill. Black guillemots are the least numerous of our breeding auks. Breeding birds are mainly black, but with a large white wing patch and red legs. In non-breeding plumage they retain the white wing patch, but the underparts are white, and there is black and white mottling on the crown and back. Puffins are colonial nesting birds using old rabbit burrows or other holes. The largest British colonies are in the north, though there are a few smaller ones on the English south coast. They're one of the most distinctive birds. There's nothing quite like a puffin's bill. The bill becomes much duller in winter, but we can see very little of them at that time of the year because they're out at sea. Little auks are only erratic winter visitors. Most sightings are along the east coast after northerly gales. They are genuinely small birds, being about the same size as a starling. The bill is small and they look rather neckless. There are a few white streaks on the upper parts. Judging the size of lone birds can be difficult, so they can be confused with puffins, but little auks are a size down and have a much smaller bill. Rock doves are the ancestor of the feral pigeons we see in cities and towns. Genuinely wild rock doves are now restricted to remote parts of Scotland and Ireland. Rock doves are grey birds with metallic shading on the neck, 2 dark wing bars and a whitish rump. Feral pigeons occur in a huge variety of plumages, so there are lots of possibilities for confusion. The ones shown here are very average, but they can be white, black, brown, or all sorts of odd mixtures. Stock doves are found in park and farmland, where they often form mixed flocks with wood pigeon. They look very similar to rock doves, but stock doves have thinner wing bars and lack a white rump. They are smaller than wood pigeons and don't have any white on the wings and neck. Wood pigeons are one of the commonest British birds, and they're also our largest pigeon. They're bulky, full-chested birds with a white bar on the wing and white patches on the neck. Juveniles lack the neck patches and have dark eyes. Their rhythmic cooing song is a familiar sound. Collared doves first reached Britain in the 1950s. They are now widespread and familiar birds. They are pale grey buff with a relatively long tail and a black half collar which has a white edge, though juveniles lack the half collar. Their endlessly repeated song is a familiar suburban sound. Turtle doves are only summer visitors to Britain, frequenting woodland, farmland and parkland. This is Britain's smallest dove. They are distinctly smaller than collared doves and have darker and more heavily patterned upper parts and more contrasting tail markings. They have a soft purring song. Cuckoos are summer visitors, and the male's call is far-carrying and instantly recognisable. The upper parts, head and breast are grey. The underbody is white with blackish barring. In flight they can suggest a falcon or a hawk, but the combination of grey upper parts, pointed wings and long tail point to cuckoo. The barn owl is another very recognisable bird, though like many owls they aren't always the easiest birds to see. Seen in the half light of dusk they look very white birds with a large head. They don't hoot but have a variety of hissing and snoring sounds. They fly low over fields, hunting small mammals. Like all owls, the flight is virtually silent. Little owls aren't native to Britain. They were introduced in the 1800s and are now fairly widespread in southern Britain. It isn't unusual to see them during the day, and they sometimes sit out in conspicuous positions. As their name suggests, this is our smallest owl. They're only half the size of the tawny owl and not much bigger than a starling. They give clear calls and have a monotonous repeated song. The tawny owl is the most widespread owl in Britain, though they don't occur in Ireland. They are closely associated with woodland, but their nocturnal habits make them difficult to see. They look a bit like long-eared owls, but are plumper birds with a more round face, dark eyes and no ear tufts. Males have a quavering hoot. Which females answer with a sharp call. Fledged young can sometimes be seen soon after they leave the nest. Long-eared owls nest in woodland and thickets, but your best chance of seeing one is at a winter roost or a newly arrived coastal migrant. They're beautifully camouflaged birds, but occasionally you get close enough to see the ear tufts and orange eyes. The song is deep and far-carrying. Short-eared owls nest on moorland and young plantations in northern Britain and move to lower areas in winter. They're more likely to be seen during the day than other owls. The plumage is yellower and less rufous than long-eared owls. The small ear tufts are difficult to see, and they have yellow, not orange eyes. In flight, they look paler below than long-eared owls, to the extent that they could be mistaken for a barn owl, but note the breast streaking and the streaky upper parts. Nightjars are localised summer visitors to heathland, young plantations and clear fell areas across southern Britain. They're nocturnal birds, and their strange chirring song isn't heard until the light is almost gone. Kingfishers are found at lowland streams, rivers and lakes across most of Britain. They're so different in shape and coloration from any other British bird, identification isn't a problem. Even the briefest flash of electric blue as one speeds past is sufficient to identify it. They have shrill and penetrating calls. Hoopoes are summer visitors to southern Britain. They are bred in southeast England and turn up every year in small numbers. They're such odd-looking birds that they're often reported by non-bird watchers, puzzled by the exotic bird they've just seen. The black-tipped crest is only found on landing or when alarmed. The rounded black and white wings and undulating flight can make them look a bit like a huge butterfly. Wrynecks have more or less ceased to breed in Britain and are most likely to be seen as scarce migrants. They have complicated, finely barred plumage which gives them excellent camouflage. Migrants are often silent, but they in fact have a ringing kestrel-like call. Green woodpeckers are found in deciduous and mixed woodland across most of Britain. This is the only British woodpecker with green in the plumage. Other notable features are the black face, red crown, and the ringing laughing call. Great spotted woodpeckers are the commonest of the woodpeckers, though they don't occur in Ireland. The strongly pied plumage with a striking white shoulder patch readily identifies them, but when hidden from view they can often be located by their abrupt calls. They vibrate their bills on dead wood to produce a drumming sound. Lesser spotted woodpeckers are commonest in southeast Britain, becoming scarcer further north and are absent from Scotland and Ireland. They're small, elusive birds, round about the same size as a sparrow. They have a high-pitched call. Males have a red crown, but unlike great spotted woodpecker, neither sex has any red on the undertail. On females, the crown is pale, and lesser spots have a barred back without the large white patches seen on great spotted woodpecker. Common swifts are very much summer birds, arriving in May and mostly gone by the end of August. Despite a superficial resemblance to swallows and martins, they're quite different. Swifts are larger birds with long scythe-shaped wings and a forked tail, which is often held closed. The plumage is all dark except for a small pale throat patch, and they have piercing calls. Sand martins are summer visitors seen at almost any watery habitat and nesting in sandy riverbanks or gravel pits. They're dull brown above and white below, with a brown band across the breast. They're small birds with a rather weak fluttery flight. Swallows are one of the most familiar summer visitors. They're found right across Britain. They differ from the two martins in having a reddish face and a deeply forked tail with elongated outer tail feathers. Juveniles have much shorter outer tail feathers and the face is orangey rather than red. House martins are best known for nesting under the gutterings on buildings, though a few cliff nesting colonies still occur. The upper parts are dark bluish-black. The white rump shows well here, and it's obvious in flight. This bird is gathering mud for its nest, and the short white feathered legs can be seen. Well known for its dynamic song flight, the skylark is a widespread but declining bird of farmland and rough ground. Most larks are streaky brown birds, and skylarks are no exception. This bird is displaying so you can see the short crest and the white outer tail feathers. Those white outer tail feathers are most evident in their song flight, and you can also see the distinctive pale trailing edge to the wing. Woodlarks are scarce breeding birds on heathland and downland in southern Britain. They look very like skylarks but are slightly smaller with a shorter tail, a barely noticeable crest, a more prominent white supercilium, and they have a distinctive black and white spot on the forewing. But you can barely see it on this bird, though you can hear the mellow call in the background. The melodic song is given from the ground or in a circling song flight, and notice how short the tail looks. Shorelarks are scarce winter visitors to Britain, occurring in small flocks in coastal areas, chiefly in eastern Britain. They're unobtrusive birds, but the diagnostic black and yellow head markings pick them out readily enough. If the head markings are hidden, shorelarks can still be told from skylarks by the much reduced streaking on their upper parts and underparts. The meadow pipit is the commonest species of pipit and is found across most of Britain. The plumage is extremely similar to the next species, tree pipit, and they're best separated by call. Meadow pipits have a lisping call, quite different from the hoarse tz of tree pipit. And remember that meadow pipits are much commoner than tree pipits. Tree pipits are summer visitors only to woodland with open areas, but migrants can often be seen at treeless coastal headlands. The song may be delivered from a tree top or in flight. They're usually a bit cleaner looking and better marked than meadow pipits and show more contrast between the white belly and buffy flanks. But the call is so different from meadow pipits that it really has to be the best way to tell them apart. Rock pipits are found around most of the British coasts, but are rarely seen inland. They're often seen with meadow pipits and are slightly bigger, darker birds, with more blurred streaking on the underparts, and the legs are noticeably darker. The call can be heard in the background and is similar to meadow pipits, but a little bit more emphatic. The outer tail feathers aren't as white as on the other pipits. Water pipits are scarce winter visitors to South and East England. They're extremely similar to rock pipits, but have browner upper parts, a better supercilium and whiter outer tail feathers. They're more distinctive in breeding plumage when the underparts are almost unstreaked and have a pinky wash to them. Richard's pipits are very scarce autumn visitors to Britain from Asia. They're noticeably larger than any of our native pipits. Indeed, the upright stance and stout bill can make them look a bit like a small thrush. They have an emphatic call. Tawny pipits don't breed in Britain, but they're scarce migrants from the continent. They're a little smaller than Richard's pipit, and their paler appearance and smaller bill can make them look a bit wagtail-like, but their legs are pale, not dark. They're best separated from Richard's pipit by the dark line between the bill and the eye. This area is pale on Richard's pipit. Yellow wagtails are summer visitors to lowland freshwater marshes and meadows. Adult males are bright yellow below and greenish above. Females are duller, and juveniles have even less yellow. The dark legs and long tails separate them from the pipits. The shrill call often helps to locate birds flying over. Grey wagtails are resident birds breeding along fast-flowing streams and rivers. Males have a black bib, but the yellow underparts of both sexes are reminiscent of a yellow wagtail, but the upper parts are grey. Both sexes of grey wagtail are noticeably longer tail than the other wagtails, and they always have yellow undertail coverts. They have a sharp and penetrating call. The pied wagtail is found right across Britain, even in towns and cities, and they're usually near some sort of wet habitat. Breeding birds have a black chin which becomes whitish in the winter. The call isn't quite as sharp as grey wagtails. Whatever the age and season, pied wagtails do indeed look pied. Young birds have a faintly yellowish face, but they lack yellow on the underparts. Waxwings are winter visitors to Britain, occurring in reasonable numbers in invasion years, but decidedly scarce at other times. They're very attractive birds, and the plump shape, buffy plumage, punk rocker crest, and bright wing markings and yellow tail tip mean they're also very distinctive. They have a silvery trilling call. Dippers are birds of fast-flowing streams and rivers, chiefly in upland areas. The plump, short-tailed look and dark plumage with a white bib means this is another unmistakable bird, though they're surprisingly easy to overlook. The white eyelid normally shows up well. Wrens are tiny but widespread birds found in a variety of habitats from gardens to moorlands. Their small size, dull plumage and habit of keeping to cover means that wrens probably cause a lot of misidentifications, but given a decent view, this tiny bird with its confidently upright tail is distinctive enough. The song is surprisingly loud and vehement for such a small bird. Dunnocks are unobtrusive birds which occur throughout most of Britain. The old name for them is hedge sparrow, and although they do look a bit sparrow-like, the bill is much thinner than real sparrows. The mixture of streaked upper parts and blue-grey face and breast is characteristic of the dunnock. The song is a hurried jingle. Robins are probably the best known bird in Britain, and also one of the commonest. Adults are very distinctive, and the red face and breast are unmatched by any other British bird. A pleasant, slightly sad song can be heard at any time of the year. Youngsters lack any red at first, but they soon start to develop a few red feathers and look like adults by the autumn. Nightingales are birds of deciduous woodland, occurring as a summer visitor only in southeast England. They're very shy birds, a bit bigger than a robin, with a rufous tail. Of course, nightingales are best known for their rich song, which is indeed often heard at night. Bluethroats breed across much of continental Europe, but they're only scarce passage migrants in Britain. The throat can have either a red or a white spot at the centre. The pale supercilium usually shows well, and as this bird turns you can see the rufous patches at the base of the tail. Females and young birds lack the bright throat markings. They have a gorget of streaks, plus the same white supercilium and rufous tail patches as the male. Common redstarts are summer visitors to woodland and parkland. Males are orangey below, blue-grey above, and have a black face with a white upper border. Females are brown birds. From the rear they look a bit like a robin, but they're slimmer and the rufous tail is habitually quivered. Black redstarts are darker and much scarcer than common redstarts, with a few pairs nesting in southern Britain. Breeding males have a black face and chest and a variable white wing patch. Females and young birds are duller and greyer than the equivalent plumage of common redstart. Windchats are summer visitors to upland areas of Britain and are commonest in the north and in the west. Breeding males are readily identified by their bold head pattern. The dark cheeks contrast strongly with the white supercilium. Females and young birds aren't so well marked, But one noticeable feature of whinchats are the white patches at the base of the tail that they don't normally show at rest. Stonechats breed on uplands and heathlands, but unlike their close relative the whinchat, they're resident birds. They often perch out conspicuously in the open. Adult males have a blackish head without a white supercilium, and stonechats don't have the white tail patches seen on whinchats. Females are duller birds with less obvious white patches on the wings and the neck. Northern wheatears, or just wheatears as they're simply referred to, are summer visitors to upland areas. Breeding males have grey upperparts, blackish wings and black through the eye with a white supercilium above that. In flight they show white on the rump and tail, which contrasts with the inverted black T on the tail tip. Females and young birds are duller than males, with browner upperparts and a buff, not white supercilium. The blackbird is one of the most familiar birds, penetrating even into cities. Males are all black, but with a yellow beak and eye ring. They give loud, scolding calls at dusk. They're also great songsters. Females are much brown and have a hint of spotting on the breast. Juveniles are more rufus brown and also more speckled. Ringoozles are summer visitors to moorland and fell and form something of an upland version of the blackbird. The key difference from blackbird is the white bib. Although they're still fairly common birds, the song thrush has declined significantly in recent years. The upper parts are warm brown and there are two faint wing bars. The heavily spotted underparts have a buffy wash, particularly on the flanks. The song can sound similar to blackbirds, but is more repetitive and less fluent. Mistle thrushes are widespread birds on farmland and more open woodland. They're told from the smaller but similar song thrush by their greyer upper parts and the white corners to the tail, though they can hardly be seen here. The underparts are a chalkier white than those on song thrush, and the face has two indistinct dark bars. Although a few pairs of fieldfares nest in Britain, we see them primarily as winter visitors. This is a large, handsome thrush with chattering calls. They're not quite as big as a mistle thrush and are easily told from them by their chestnut back and grey head and rump. Redwings breed in small numbers in Scotland, but are much better known as a winter visitor. Like the song thrush, they're brown above and white with dark spots below. But they're easily recognised by the red patch on the flanks and the striking white supercilium. Redwings often form mixed flocks with fieldfares. Chetty's warblers are rare breeding birds in southern England. Unlike most warblers, they're resident and don't migrate. They have rufous brown upperparts, pale underparts and a short whitish supercilium. Their explosive song is often the best means of locating them. Grasshopper warblers are summer visitors to areas with dense scrubby vegetation. Streaky above and paler below, they would probably pass unnoticed, except for their remarkable reeling song. Sedge warblers are birds of wetland fringes, though they occasionally breed in drier areas. Various warblers nest in watery habitats, but the sedge warbler is the streakiest. The song contains more churs and rattles than the song of reed warbler. Reed warblers are closely associated with reed beds and are commonest in southern Britain. They are plain birds without the obvious markings seen on sedge warblers. The song is grating and rather repetitive, with a rather more even tempo than sedge warbler. Marsh warblers are rare summer visitors to areas of rank, weedy vegetation in a few places in southern England. They're very, very similar to the much commoner reed warbler, though the plumage does have a slightly more olive tone, but they're best told by their remarkable song, which consists largely of mimicry, and which includes a distinctive nasal tone heard well at the end of this sequence. Icterine warblers are only scarce passage migrants in Britain, seen mainly on the east coast. They look a bit like a willow warbler or a chiffchaff, but are heavier, more ponderous birds with a bland facial expression and a stouter bill. The pale fringes to the wing feathers form a pale wing panel. The melodious warbler forms an obvious species pair with the icterine warbler, and like it, they're very scarce migrants. They average slightly smaller than icterine warbler and have less of a wing panel. But the key difference is the shorter wings of melodious warbler. Along with Chetty's warbler, Dartford warbler is our only other resident warbler. Like Chetty's, it's a rare breeding bird restricted to southern England. This is a dark warbler with a long tail. The upper parts are grey-brown and the underparts are wine-red, but with a narrow white belly and a few white spots on the throat. Common whitethroats are birds of scrubby, bushy habitats. Males are greyer on the head and whiter on the throat than females. This male is less grey-headed and looks more like a female. Both sexes have broad, rusty edges to the wing feathers. Lesser whitethroats are summer visitors, chiefly to southeastern Britain, and are distinctly scarce in Ireland. They are told from the more numerous common whitethroat by their smaller size, dark ear coverts, and the lack of rufous on their wings. They have a tacking call. And the song is a rattle. Garden warblers are birds of woodland and scrub, arriving in April and mostly gone by October. This is a very plain bird, with greyish upper parts and paler underparts. They have a stubby bill, a prominent dark eye, and a faint grey patch on the side of the neck. Blackcaps are mainly summer visitors, but a small and increasing number are choosing to spend the winter here. Males are grey-brown with a glossy black cap, though it's much duller than usual on this autumn male. Females and young birds have a less striking but still distinctive chestnut-brown cap. The song is very similar to garden warblers, but a bit louder and with shorter phrases. Chiffchaffs are one of the first summer visitors to arrive and one of the last to leave, and a few winter in Britain. They look extremely similar to willow warbler, but are a bit dingier with darker, often blackish legs. Fortunately, the song is very distinctive. They also have a habit of dipping their tails. The willow warbler is our commonest summer visitor, and their delicate cascading song is one of the key sounds of summer. They're a little bit bigger than chiffchaffs, with a fractionally longer bill, longer wings, and even the call lasts a bit longer than chiffchaffs. Here's the call of a willow warbler. And then chiffchaff. Wood warblers are summer visitors to mature deciduous woodland. They're bright birds with an obvious contrast between the yellow throat and the white belly, and the wing feathers have bright yellowy fringes. The song begins with a few short notes and then accelerates into a shivering trill. Yellow-browed warblers are very scarce autumn visitors to Britain from Siberia. They're smaller than chiffchaffs and have two pale wing bars and a long pale supercilium. The call often helps to locate them. Pallas's warbler is another Siberian bird that turns up in very small numbers in autumn. They are even smaller and more brightly coloured than yellow-browed warbler. In particular, they have a bright central crown stripe. They frequently hover, and the diagnostic pale rump is very noticeable then. The goldcrest is Britain's smallest bird and also one of the most widespread. Their main breeding habitat is coniferous woods, but in winter they often roam through woods and hedgerows with parties of tits. They have a yellow crown stripe with a dark border. The large, dark eye stands out well in the otherwise bland face. Firecrests breed in small numbers in Britain, but are more likely to be seen as a scarce passage migrant. They are just as small as goldcrests, but have a more orangey crown stripe, plus a dark line through the eye with a pale supercilium above it. With good views, it's possible to see a bronzy yellow patch on the shoulder. Spotted flycatchers are summer visitors to woods, parks and larger gardens. They're rather plain birds, brownish above and paler below with fine streaking on the breast and forehead. Young birds can show a faint wing bar, but never as strongly as the next species, pied flycatcher. The scratchy song is easily overlooked. Pied flycatchers are birds of deciduous woodland, often using nest boxes. Males have white underparts and black upperparts with white sides to the tail, and white patches on the wings and forehead. Females have brown upperparts and show less white on the wing. Before they set off on their autumn migration, males molt into a plumage very similar to the females. Red-breasted flycatchers don't breed in Britain, and they're only seen as scarce autumn migrants. Adult males have a red breast, but we see mainly females and young birds which lack any really noticeable markings, except for the bold white patches at the base of the tail. They can just be seen here, but are easiest to see in flight. Bearded tits, or bearded reedlings as they're also called, are birds of large reed beds, breeding at a few sites mostly in southern England. Adult males have a striking blue-grey head, which contrasts with the long, drooping black moustaches. Despite their name, the markings aren't beard-shaped. Females and young birds have brown heads and no moustaches, but the buffy coloration and long tail are distinctive, as are the loud pinging calls. Long-tailed tits are birds of woodland and hedgerow and are found across most of Britain. Over half their length is taken up by the very long tail. Their actual body size is very small. Taken in combination with the pink, white and black plumage, this makes them easy birds to identify. In winter they often roam around in family parties with other tits, and their rippling calls can be picked out. Marsh tits are resident in deciduous woodland in southern Britain. They are brown above and paler below, and have a neat black cap and a black bib. Their most distinctive call sounds vaguely like someone sneezing. Willow tits have a similar range in appearance to marsh tit, but prefer damper woodland. Telling them from marsh tits by their plumage is extremely difficult, but willow tits have a duller black cap and an indistinct pale wing panel. Some of the calls are rather like those of marsh tit, but they also have a diagnostic nasal call. Crested tits are restricted to the older coniferous forests in the Scottish Highlands and are virtually unknown elsewhere in Britain. This is the only small woodland bird with a crest. The fact that the crest is checkered and that they have a dark mark on the ear coverts only adds to their distinctiveness. Coal tits are widespread residents. They're fond of mixed and especially coniferous woods. This is a small bird with a neat mixture of buffy underparts, greyish upperparts with two pale wing bars and a black and white head. The key feature on coal tits is the white nape patch, a feature not seen on any other British tit. From this angle, the white nape patch is very obvious. Blue tits are the commonest member of the tit family and one of the most regular and best-known visitors to bird tables. They are small, agile and energetic birds, with the plumage being a mixture of blue, green and yellow, but with some white on the head. They have a variety of churring and trilling calls. Great tits are almost as common as blue tits. The two species are often seen together at winter feeders. This is the largest of the British tits, being about the same size as a house sparrow. The combination of larger size and black and white head markings usually picks them out. Nuthatches are birds of deciduous woodland. They are commonest in southern Britain, scarce in Scotland and absent from Ireland. They act rather like a small woodpecker, but the plumage is quite distinct from any of our woodpeckers. The upper parts are blue-grey, there's a black line through the eye, and the underparts are warm buff, becoming quite rufous on the rear flanks. The loud, whittering call often helps to locate them. Tree creepers are found in woodlands throughout Britain, though they can be unobtrusive birds. They're often seen climbing up a tree trunk looking a bit like a small mouse. The upper parts are brown and the underparts are white. The bill is slightly curved and is used to pick insect prey from crevices in the tree bark. Golden orioles breed in small numbers in East Anglia. Elsewhere in Britain they're only very scarce migrants. Adult males are brilliant yellow with black wings, but males have a fluty song. Females and immature males are greenish birds with dark wings and paler underparts. Females have harsh jay-like calls. Redback shrikes used to breed in Britain, but are now only scarce passage migrants, chiefly at coastal headlands. Males are a pleasing mix of blue-grey crown and rump, black mask, rufous back and pale underparts. Females are altogether browner birds, but with a trace of grey on the head and rump and dark crescents on the underparts. Great grey shrikes are scarce winter visitors to Britain, sometimes returning to the same site in successive years. This is a large, pale shrike which often perches conspicuously on the top of trees, but they defend large territories, so locating one, even at a regular wintering site, can be difficult. Jays are woodland birds. They're often seen in parks and gardens and are closely associated with oak trees. They're very cautious birds, so getting a good view of one isn't always easy. Often all you see is the white rump as one flies away, but with better views you can appreciate the pinkish buff plumage and blue wing flashes. Their usual call is a harsh screech, but they're excellent mimics. Listen to how this bird does a perfect imitation of a carrion crow. Colourful and full of character, the magpie is one of our most handsome birds. They're found across most of Britain, though they're distinctly scarce in northern Scotland. Identification is seldom a problem. The combination of pied plumage with a metallic gloss, very long tail and chattering call make the magpie an easy bird to identify. Choughs are rare breeding birds restricted to a few sites on the west coast of Wales and Scotland, but they're commoner in Ireland. They have the black plumage typical of many crows, but are picked out by their red bill and legs. The bill is relatively long and gently curved. And the call is a bit jackdaw-like, but hoarser. Jackdaws are birds of mature woodland and parkland, but often penetrate into towns and regularly nest on deserted buildings. They look very similar to crows or rooks, but are a size smaller and have a mainly grey head. The bill is relatively weak and the pale eye usually stands out well. They have sharp but rather conversational calls. Rooks are familiar birds on British farmland, and their nesting colonies or rookeries can be seen almost anywhere in Britain. They're very gregarious birds, and groups can be seen feeding on farmland, often in company with jackdaws. Rooks look very similar to carrion crows, but have extensive whitish on the face and bill. Their usual call is a bit hoarser than that of carrion crows. Carrion crows are widespread and common birds, occurring even in city centres where there are suitable parks. They're adaptable birds, able to exploit a variety of food sources. The plumage, bill and legs are all black. Young rooks are also all black, but they have a longer and more pointed bill, a steeper forehead and a loose thigh feathering. In Ireland and northwest Scotland, carrion crows are replaced by hooded crows, which look like a different species, but are in fact only a race or subspecies. Hooded crows are readily picked out by their grey body, and where their range overlaps with carrion crows, they hybridise and produce young with intermediate characters. Their calls are the same as those of carrion crow. Ravens occur throughout most of Wales, Scotland and Ireland, but in England they occur mainly in the west. Surrounded by carrion crows, you can see the similar plumage, but ravens are much bigger. The bill is massive, and they have a heavy jowled appearance due to the shaggy throat feathering. In flight, they show a diamond-shaped tail, and they have a gruff, croaking call. Starlings are seen throughout Britain and are particularly familiar as urban birds. Adults are dark, glossy birds, spangled with paler markings. The bill is yellowish. They have scratchy, whistling calls and also great mimics. Juveniles begin as brown birds, but soon start to develop their very different first winter feathers. Birds in partial plumage like this one are a familiar sight in the early autumn. In flight they can look a bit like a small thrush, but have more pointed wings. House sparrows are closely associated with people, so they are found right across Britain, except for a few upland areas. Males have a grey crown and a black bib, though in winter the black bib is more restricted. The song is merely a repetition of call notes. Females and youngsters are unremarkable brown birds with a plain, stout bill, a pale supercilium and plain underparts. The upper parts markings are more complicated, but still hardly eye-catching. Tree sparrows are primarily birds of farmland, and their recent decline has been linked to changes in farming practice. They're much more retiring birds than house sparrows, and unlike the house sparrow, the sexes are alike. They are told from house sparrows by their brown, not grey cap, with a pale collar behind it, and by the blackish mark just below and behind the eye. The chaffinch is the commonest member of the finch family in Britain. Indeed, it's one of our commonest birds. They can be found in a wide variety of bushy or woody habitats. Males are very colourful birds. The blue-grey crown and the nape contrast with the pinky-red face and underparts. The song is vigorous, but with a cheerful tone to it. Females are brown birds. Their most striking features are the double white wing bars, and both they and the male have white sides of the tail. Although bramblings have bred in Scotland, they are much more familiar as winter visitors. They're handsome birds. Males have a dark head, yellow bill, orange shoulders and breast, and white belly. One key feature is the oval white rump, which can just be seen here. The nasal call can be heard in the background here. Females are easily overlooked amongst female chaffinches, but have more orange in their plumage. Also, their head markings are more striking. Compare this brambling in the background with the chaffinch in the foreground. Serins are a very scarce summer visitor to Britain, with a few pairs breeding in southern England in most years. This is a very small finch. Males have a lemon yellow face and chest. The upper parts are greenish with obvious streaking, and the rump is yellow. Females are duller but still have some yellow on the face and chest, plus a yellow rump. They have a crackling, jangling song. Greenfinches are common throughout Britain and are frequent visitors to garden feeders. This is a stout finch. Males have mainly green plumage with yellow flashes on the wings and tail. The song is a varied mixture of trills. Females are quite sparrow-like but still have those yellow flashes in the wings and tail. Siskins breed in conifer woods but often visit garden feeders during the winter months. They're small birds with a contrasted green and yellow plumage. Males have a black cap and bib, and both sexes have two pale wing bars. Their song is a hurried chatter and includes a nasal wheeze. Females are duller and more heavily streaked birds, without the male's black head markings. Goldfinches are widespread birds. They're often seen feeding on thistleheads in scrubby areas. This is one of our most colourful and distinctive finches. The black, white and red on the head is very obvious at rest, but is lacking on juveniles, though they do still have the yellow wing bar which shows up best in flight. They have tinkling calls. The linnet is another common finch found throughout most of Britain, except for northwest Scotland. Breeding males are picked out by the combination of unstreaked brown back and red on the forehead and chest. Females lack red, but show a slight contrast between the grey head and brown body. Like the male, they have white flashes in the wings and tail. The white tail flash can just be seen here, but the wing flash is a bit more obvious. Twite are something of an upland version of the linnet. They breed rather patchily in the Pennines, Scotland and Western Ireland. In winter, they're largely coastal birds. They look very like linnets, but the short stubby bill is pale and the face is more warmly coloured than on a linnet. They have two indistinct buffy wing bars. They have a distinctive nasal call. Redpolls are found in coniferous and birch woodland across most of Britain. They can be confused with linnets, but redpolls are smaller, with a black chin, pale wing bars, but no white wing or tail flashes. They're often picked out by their rattling calls. Crossbills are birds of coniferous woods where they're patchily distributed and subject to fluctuation in numbers. They're told from most other finches by their crossed mandibles. Males are bright red. Females and juveniles are green and could be overlooked, but the crossed bill immediately separates them. Juveniles have obvious streaking, which the adults lack. The Scottish crossbill is restricted to ancient Caledonian forest in central Scotland. It's our only endemic bird, and until recently was considered to be a race of common crossbill. They're very, very similar to common crossbills, but have a fractionally bigger head with a deeper, blunter bill. Unfortunately, it really isn't 100% safe to identify birds on where in the country you see them, as common crossbills sometimes occur in the same woods. Hawfinches are elusive birds with a patchy distribution, chiefly in southern Britain. They're large-headed, bull-necked birds with a massive steel blue bill. The white wing bar and short tail are most visible in flight. Females are duller than males and don't have the same glossy sheen to the flight feathers. They have abrupt ticking calls. Bullfinches are found throughout nearly all of Britain, but are retiring birds. They invariably travel around in pairs, and if you see one, it's a good bet that their mate is somewhere nearby. They have soft, piping calls. The white rump can just be seen here, and note also the white wing bar. Scarlet rosefinches have bred in Britain, but they're commoner, though still very scarce, as passage migrants. Adult males are scarlet on the head, breast and rump. The far-carrying song is often described as sounding like, "Pleased to meet you." Females and young males are brown, sparrow-like birds with light streaking on the upper parts, a dark beady eye and two pale wing bars. Lapland buntings have bred in Scotland, but they're primarily seen as winter visitors to eastern coastal areas. Males in full breeding plumage are a rare sight in Britain. Females and non-breeding birds are unremarkable birds, rather like reed bunting, but with a pale central crown stripe and a pale yellowy bill. The small number of snow buntings breeding in Scotland are outnumbered by the birds which come to spend the winter here. They winter mainly in coastal areas, though sometimes also inland. Adult males have the most white in the plumage, so they're the easiest to identify. Females and immatures are browner, but nevertheless still pale birds, and in flight they always show at least some white in the wing. Yellowhammers are widespread birds of fields, hedgerows and open country. The male's far-carrying song and bright colours often make them conspicuous birds. The song is often likened to the phrase, "A little bit of bread and new cheese." Females are duller and less yellow than males, particularly on the head, and their underparts are more streaking. Searle buntings have a very limited distribution in Britain, being virtually confined to Devon and Cornwall. Males are distinctive birds with striking black, yellow and olive head markings. They have a rattling song. Females are much more like their close relative the yellowhammer, but the head is more strongly patterned and the rump is greyish, not rufous. Ortolan buntings don't breed in Britain and are only seen here as very scarce passage migrants. The body is buffy brown with a grey-green head except for a yellow moustache and throat. Females and young birds are duller and more streaked, but the pale bill and pale eye-ring of Ortolan buntings are important features. As their name suggests, reed buntings are mainly associated with wetlands, but they also do turn up in dry habitats. Breeding males have a black head and bib and white moustache. The song is simple and pretty unmusical. Females and young males are streaky brown birds. They have a dark border to the cheeks, a pale moustachial stripe, and a dark line below that. Corn buntings are found on farmland across most of Britain, but they have declined significantly. This is the largest and chunkiest of our buntings. The plumage is dull brown with some streaking, but no distinctive markings. The song is often likened to a bunch of keys being jangled. Unlike the other buntings, there are no plumage differences between the sexes.